Hello, this is Tom, and welcome to another edition of Talking Blu with the Digital Bits on Midnight's Edge. With me today from the Bits is Tim Salmons. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Tom. How's it going?
It's going good. On the last episodes, Bill and Andre joined me to cover new and upcoming catalog releases in 4K. This time, though, Tim and I are going to be discussing some new and upcoming catalog titles on Blu-ray and DVD from a few of the big studios, but mostly from some of the smaller boutique labels, such as Shout, Arrow, Olive, etc. Alright, so let's not waste any more time. Let's get started with the first company. How about that?
Sounds good to me.
First up on the agenda, it looks like Arrow Video and Arrow Academy. Now, both of us recently got a chance to check out Basket Case. We've talked about it in the past.
Yes.
I was just impressed with how much love went into this movie, considering it's not your standard run-of-the-mill, I would even know if you could consider it a B movie in some ways. Because, I mean, it's one of those movies that was shot on 16 millimeter in the 1970s, of course.
Yeah.
And if you haven't had a chance to see it, and if you love cheesy B-horror movies, this one's right up your alley. And much like the recent video we did on Night of the Living Dead, this movie was also preserved and remastered by Museum of Modern Art.
Yes, that's correct. They did, Basket Case has never really looked that bad on Blu-ray, but the job they did on it just improved 110% and almost looks like a legitimate movie now.
Right. Outside of a few scenes that were from a 35 millimeter blown up print that they had to use. Other than that, it looks just gorgeous.
Yeah.
For being shot on 16 millimeter and as old as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, it gets a huge bevy of extras to go with it. And speaking of extras, another release from Academy and Arrow, or from Arrow Video, was Killer Klowns from Outer Space, which has been out on Blu-ray before in a pretty decent special edition prior to this, but now we've got an even more elaborate version.
It's a great addition. I mean, I'm just shocked that this movie gets any love at all. It's so goofy and fun. I believe Bill is a big fan of it. He's talked to me about it once or twice in the past. It's just amazing that a movie like this can still be around all these years later.
Well, it does seem to have quite the little cult following.
Mm-hmm.
I'm amazed at the people that I've met that have actually seen it and are fans of it too, and I like it for its goofiness and its satire on old 50s B-horror movies, and the effects for the time are just amazing, and of course it was a passion project from the Chiodo brothers, so it shows through the film. It doesn't take itself seriously at all, and I think that's part of the charm.
Right. It's great stuff. It's great stuff.
Umbrella Entertainment is another company that's kind of up and coming with some great releases. Now, I have, and you have, the recent release from them of Silver Bullet, the Stephen King adaptation. And now, this, of course, was a Region B release, correct?
Technically, yes, even though it's an all-region release, right. But the packaging does say Region B on it, and that's something that they try to do more often than not. I know I formerly used to say that all their Blu-ray releases were region-free, but there's been a couple that people have informed me that no, not all of them, but for the most part, most of them are region-free, despite what the packaging says. Well,
and it usually comes down to licensing, I believe, on that part, but, some get through the cracks here and there, and it just depends on the title, but I liked it. It was the transfer was okay. I noticed I had some issues, but you and I had discussed this, and we think it may have something more to do with my setup than the actual Blu-ray itself, because you didn't seem to have any issues, or basically what I'm seeing may just be something that's inherent to the film at the time that it was made, perhaps, and I'm just noticing it more so now.
I didn't notice any issues myself. It's obviously an older transfer, but it's not a bad transfer. The movie could do with a new transfer sometime down the road. Whether or not whoever does it stateside,
You also wanted to talk a little bit about the Drive-In Delirium series from Umbrella?
Yeah, these kinds of releases are getting pretty popular. They're basically trailer compilations of movies from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so forth. All it is just a curated collection of trailers, sometimes running as long as 3.5, 4 hours. And I love these releases. A, it's just fun to watch advertising for older movies, but B, a lot of times they'll stick in something that I've never, ever even heard of, and I'm just in intrigues me into hunting it down and finding it. And I think they're just great little releases that I don't know if I would recommend just sitting and watching these things, because your brain does tend to melt after a while after being bombarded with advertising for so long. These are great for like backgrounds and parties and things like that, but I highly recommend them. They're called, they have 3 of them so far, and I have a feeling they'll do more in the future. They're all called Drive-In Delirium, and the ones, let's see, 60s and 70s Savagery, Maximum 80s Overdrive, and the new batch, which we all know what that's a reference to, but they're all great.
Well, and I can attest to the fact that if you haven't heard of something, then it's pretty rare. But also, I notice that it's great to have these kind of compilations sometimes, because as you can testify to, the studios aren't really pulling out the trailers and stuff like they used to anymore either. And you have even put together a YouTube channel to collect a lot of these TV spots and trailers that are just becoming rarer and rarer when it comes to releases anymore. To try and find some of these spots and stuff can be difficult.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, you can find them. They are out there in some capacity, depending on, the quality, whether you get it from the original source or if it's just from a VHS tape of, say somebody was recording The Cosby Show back in the early 90s and they happen to run a TV trailer for a movie that's not on any release. So, I mean, they're out there. They're just getting more and more easy to find because more people are uploading commercials and commercial compilations from these old tapes of theirs, and there's a lot of gold in those compilations to be found. So all I did was I just snapped up as many as I could find and put them on this YouTube channel just for archival purposes. I don't make any money off of it. It's just a fun thing to do because I'd like to see this stuff preserved and all in one place, regardless of what quality it's in. At least it's preserved somewhere. But yeah, I'd love to be able to find more TV spots and trailers directly from the original either tape source or film source. That'd be great.
They didn't save a lot of that stuff back in the day. A lot of it just got tossed out.
No, they didn't.
And unless somebody's got it sitting in their attic because they happen to work at a theater at the time, or knew a guy who knew a guy, or worked at a television station.
Yeah, or just collectors in general, yeah.
Right. Speaking of somebody, though, who is also into preserving trailers and making sure they can get whatever they can for their releases, somebody who's going to come up quite a bit in this show or episodes is Shout. And so we've broken them up a little bit, and we have a few different sections of those. Shout Select, though, is one that you wanted to bring up right away and up front, and I know why, because they've got some great titles right now that they're releasing. So, Tim, why don't you take us through some of those?
Oh yeah, they've been releasing some really great, not just obscure titles, but some mainstream ones. And the one I want to talk about right off the bat is The Burbs. And Joe Dante's The Burbs is in my opinion, is a masterpiece in its own. It's like a masterpiece of black comedy. They really, it was a title that was available through Arrow with some really nice extras, a nice transfer. But as far as the U.S., all that we ever had over here was a bare bones Blu-ray. But I knew good and well that when Universal released a Blu-ray here with no extras on it, with an old transfer, I knew that was their way of capitalizing on it before somebody else did. So I had a feeling that was going to happen. And sure enough, Shout Select came along and they did a new 2K scan of the film's interpositive element. And they carried over most of the extras from the Arrow video ones, all the main ones anyways, and added a couple of new ones, including a couple of new interviews. But this set has got some great stuff on it. It's got an hour-long documentary, if I remember correctly, about the making of the movie, the original work print of the movie, which has all kinds of deleted and extended scenes from it. So this is like one of their most prized releases here in the U.S.
Yeah, I have the Arrow release, but I haven't got a chance to get my hands on the Shout one yet. But I remember from your review, you did say there was some variations in the transfer, and you said you got to kind of just pick whichever one you want to go with on that.
Yeah. Because
the one from Arrow, if I remember correctly, you're saying was supervised by the cinematographer.
Yeah, that's right. It was actually supervised by the cinematographer, so, they both look good. I'm not going to say one looks worse than the other. It's just a matter of preference. The color timing is a little different between the two transfers. The amount of detail is slightly stronger in the Shout Select, but it's very marginal. It's very small. So, it's all down to a matter of preference, and no matter which release you pick, you're going to get a good transfer.
Well, and you have a similar kind of situation, I remember, with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, where Shout was even able to have both transfers on their version because they happened to be working with MGM, who had done the other transfer, which was supervised by their cinematographer there, and their version was a little bit different, but they allowed you to have both versions, so you had a choice. And again, I had to go with the Shout transfer, just a little bit of an edge, because even though that was a little bit different from the other transfer, it seemed to pop a lot more, like you said, with a little bit more detail and stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember. I remember the Shout version being slightly better, having, like you said, having a slight edge. And that's great. It's nice to have choice, In the case of the Burbs, the only thing that puzzled me about that release is why it wasn't a Scream Factory release, and that, and including another title that we're going to be talking about here in a second, because they seem to fit into that Scream Factory wheelhouse. They don't seem to fit within the Shout Select line very snugly, but it was probably just a matter of what do we do. This could be either or. So it was probably just a matter of, we have so many titles for the Scream line, maybe we should farm some out to the Shout Select line, or whatever the case may be.
I think part of it, just to finish up the talk about the Burbs too, is I think part of it is A, you have an A-list star.
Yes.
B, the Burbs is one of those movies that even though it doesn't get brought up a lot, I notice that when you do bring it up to somebody, almost everybody universally loves that film, no pun intended.
Right.
And it's one of Joe Dante's undersung films, it seems like, at times. And, like, people almost forget that he directed it in a way, I guess. And because usually a lot of attention more so always generally seems to go towards Gremlins or Inner Space when somebody brings him up. They don't generally seem to bring up the Burbs right away for some reason. And it's one of those films that is almost, I hate to say it, but there's not too many of them, but it is almost like a perfect film. Like, every beat was hit, every payoff is there, the script is, the story is perfectly set up. You have that Hitchcockian tension throughout the film that you can feel that Dante channeled into the movie, and with his sensibility and humor, it was one of those lightning in a bottle movies that I feel doesn't get enough attention, like, say, Back to the Future or something like that, or even Gremlins, to bring up one of his examples.
Right. And to the same degree, another movie he did following the Burbs, not long after, was Matinee, which also got a Shout Select release.
Yeah, that's another one of his, and John Goodman starred in that, of course. And I haven't seen it in recent years, and I do want to pick up Shout Select's Blu-ray of it, because I'm sure, as you're about to tell us, it's probably loaded with a lot of goodies, and it looks great, I can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's same situation as the Burbs. Like, it was released by Arrow overseas in a Region B release. And I just assumed that Arrow would release it over here, since they've been releasing stuff Region A anyways. The same with Killer Klowns. Killer Klowns, their Blu-ray was a Region B release, and eventually they got around to doing it Region A. So I just assumed that Matinee would be the same, but no, Shout Select got it, and they carried over pretty much all of the extras from the Arrow release, and the transfer is great. And this movie, more than most of his movies, really just it stands up and it stands out in a class of its own. It's not really a comedy. It's more of just a satirization and just a loving tribute to William Castle as well. It's a movie that, like the Burbs, doesn't get mentioned enough, because of Gremlins and The Howling. I think those movies get talked about more. Yeah, I think those movies get talked about more than some of his other movies, and I think this movie is better than some of those bigger movies. I like honestly, I like Matinee and the Burbs more than I like The Howling.
I kind of agree with you there, and I love how you brought up a fact that it was a love letter to William Castle, because that's like almost every one of his movies is a love letter to somebody. Burbs, like I said, was almost like a love letter to Hitchcock. Gremlins is a love letter to Frank Capra and 60s B horror films like the Pod movies and stuff like that. And same thing with Matinee, in a way, is also just a tribute to his love of films in general too, not just Castle. But I mean, that's the great thing about Joe Dante, and he is a very undersung director in a lot of ways, and it's
absolutely,
he's got such a huge catalog of films that never gets mentioned, like you said, and it's just amazing that he's done with. And Gremlins 2 doesn't get enough credit either. I feel Gremlins 2 is a very strong sequel, especially considering he went above and beyond and did it as a satire and had the balls to do that. I think never gets enough credit to this day.
Yeah, Gremlins 2 is just one of those movies that it's a miracle that ever got made through a studio system. It's just amazing that not only did they allow it to happen, but they released it and they weren't ashamed of it. They promoted the shit out of it.
No kidding.
And you saw all the promotions through, through hotels and, cereal companies and video games, and they tried to do something with that movie. And it's amazing that Joe Dante was able to make the movie he wanted to make on his own terms. And
right.
Unfortunately, it did not pay off. It was not a successful movie, but it is constantly brought up as, just by a lot of people our age nowadays who are just like, when you're a kid, it's just a Gremlins movie. Right. You don't totally see all of the satirization that's going on in it until you're adult, and then you find like a new appreciation for it when you grow up and you notice all this stuff. So
luckily for me, it came out at the right time that I already was kind of getting to that age where I could see the satire, and I loved it for that. So yeah, but yeah,
yeah,
I am a little bit older than you, so.
Yeah, I kind of saw the satire in it, but it didn't really click until I got older.
Oh yeah.
So,
but that's one of those movies that you find so much in every viewing that you didn't see the first time around. But back on track here. Speaking of movies that kind of did their own thing, I guess, Dr. Detroit. Not a movie you hear a lot about. The fact that it gets a Shout Select release is kind of mind-boggling, but it's great because it's just a cheesy piece of 80s movie history that tends to get overlooked, it seems like, nowadays.
Yeah, it's one of those movies that I can't say that it's a good movie, but fuck is it entertaining. I really enjoy the movie.
It's funny as hell.
Yeah, and the extras on that release are outstanding. They managed to get the director to do a commentary for it, Michael Pressman, which Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan will know is the director of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, and also an interview with him. But the best extra on this release, in my opinion, is an extra called Radio Free Detroit, which is an LP that they took the audio from, it's an LP they released to radio stations and news outlets, with interviews from people from the movie, radio spots, and all that kind of stuff. And there's interview snippets with people like John Belushi and Steve Martin. That is one of the most entertaining extras I've come across in a while.
Yeah, I loved that. It was nice. I love it when they find those kind of things because it's just cool to have a nice little piece of history like that to have presented and preserved like this. And that's one thing Shout has always done, has gone above and beyond, and whatever they can find, it seems like if they can get it somehow on the disc, they'll do it. And that's what I love about them. Mm-hmm. Now, one that you've mentioned, I believe, in the past, but has been delayed, Wild at Heart with, was it Nicolas Cage, and who else was in that?
Laura Dern, Willem Dafoe, Harry Dean Stanton.
What is going on with that title there?
Well, the answer, I don't really know, and nobody really knows the official answer. And it was due 2 or 3 weeks ago, I believe it was. It was due out on Blu-ray, and I have a copy of it, and because I got a screener copy of it to review, and I was in the middle of writing up a review for it when suddenly it was announced that it's being delayed, and the reasons were unspecified. And the theory was, and I personally don't believe this, but the theory was that the main menu was supposed to have music on it and it's silent. I don't see that as a good enough reason to pull a release myself. That seems far-fetched, but the one thing that I came up with, which I do believe may be the case, is when they announced the extras for this, they announced the full extras, and there was one additional extra on it that wasn't originally announced, and it was the uncut death of Willem Dafoe's character, which was censored for most releases of it. And it was released overseas on some release somewhere with that scene uncensored. And they included that as an extra. I have a feeling that David Lynch or someone representing David Lynch found out about that and asked them to take that off. That's my theory, but I don't know that for sure.
I guess we'll have to see, yeah.
Yeah. So if it comes out again and it doesn't have that on it, then we'll know for sure.
Bingo, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but otherwise, just to prepare people, because it is supposed to be released in August, it's a great disc. It's the same transfer that we've had for a couple of previous Blu-ray releases, including the Twilight Time release, but excellent set of extras, including an interview with the original novelist who wrote Wild at Heart, Barry Gifford. So, yeah, that's a great release, so be on the lookout for that one that comes out in August.
All right. Now, a company I'm not too familiar with, Dread Central and Epic Pictures. Tell us a little bit about them and what they got coming for us.
Well, Epic Pictures is a company that's been around for a while. They've put out a couple of movies you might have heard of, like Turbo Kid. They put that out on Blu-ray.
I have it, but I haven't watched it yet.
You really should. It's a terrific movie. But anyways, actually didn't start out as a home video line. It just started as a distribution line for theatrical stuff. And Dread Central Presents was the line, is what it's called. And they decided to release some Blu-ray releases. And one of their first ones, which was Terrifier, which some people might have heard of. I'm not really a big fan of that one. The second one they put out, which I have in my hand here, that is called The Lodgers. And what this is an Italian Gothic horror film in the vein of like a Mario Bava movie or something like that, where it's very low key, it's very slow, and it's one of the things about it that I like is that it's very slow paced, maybe a little bit too slow, but it's a little slow, and it doesn't fully deliver on the ghost story aspects of it, and the story itself isn't 100% clean, but the presentation of it is beautiful, and that's what the best thing about it is the presentation. It looks amazing the way everything is framed and the darkness of it. The darks are so dark that I mentioned in my review of it that you could, in all honesty, accidentally think that your setup is incorrect, like maybe your calibration for your TV or your projector is wrong because it's so dark.
Turn up the brightness.
Yes. But it's dark for a reason. It's dark because it makes you sit up and peer into the shadows a bit more than you would, because it takes place in this big gloomy mansion. And I don't want to mention the story too much, but it takes place in this mansion, and it's really darkly lit. And this place is supposedly haunted. And the way they frame the shots, you're always peering into shadows and stuff. So that's a really terrific little movie. It's not a perfect movie, but it's definitely better than run-of-the-mill ghost story movies that we get nowadays through mainstream sources.
Now, a movie that I've actually been looking at getting, and I'm sure you'll probably be able to tell me if it's worth it or not, and the rest of our listeners. MVD Rewind Collection has released Return of Swamp Thing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Return of Swamp Thing, where to start? Return of Swamp Thing is obviously a sequel to Wes Craven's Swamp Thing. It was made 5 or 6 years after the fact. Jim Wynorski, who people will recognize as director of Chopping Mall, among many other low-grade, B-grade movies, directed it. And it's actually one of his best directed movies in all seriousness. But that's not to say that this is a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination. What it is a goofy movie. You know, this is a comic book movie before Marvel came along. And
right.
And I believe, if I remember right, and on the commentary or the extras or something, Jim Wynorski said that he really just didn't care for comic books or comic book movies, so he just put his own stamp on what he wanted to do with it, and he just made this goofy little, it's not really an action movie because there's not a whole lot of action in it, but it's a sort of I would call it more as a monster movie than anything, because the effects in it are pretty stellar. Swamp Thing looks better than he did in the original, in my opinion. A lot of the monsters that he fights and comes across in the movie are pretty amazing looking, and that's the best thing about the movie is the creature effects and the monster effects. But it has Heather Locklear in it before she was Heather Locklear, and she is just constantly quipping. She's just in the movie quipping for no reason most of the time. She thinks she's in a Marx Brothers movie or something like that. But yeah, the movie, and the villain from the previous movie is back for some inexplicable reason, even though he obviously died in the first movie. But the release itself, and it's a movie that I saw when I was a kid. And
yeah, me too, on cable, and
I saw.
That's the last time I seen it.
Yeah, and I hadn't seen it in a long time either. I may have watched it one other time when I was an adult, but I didn't remember it all that much. But it's just a goofy movie, and I liked this movie a lot more when I was a kid, and so I have a sort of nostalgia for it. But the movie is just not that good. But at the same time, it's kind of goofy and fun. So there's a lot to appreciate about it. But the extras on this release. So first of all, the transfer on it is really good. But the extras are all carried over from a previous DVD release, and a bunch of new interviews and TV spots and trailers, and just it's a great disc.
I'm glad to hear that, because as I said, I am kind of hoping to pick that up soon, because I love cheesy B movies, and of course I'm a comic book fan, so it crosses over in that arena.
Yeah.
Kino Lorber is going to be doing the Outer Limits Season 1. Now, I'm assuming they're going to be in HD?
Yeah, it's the first time they've ever been in HD. And not only that, but there's not a whole lot of extras on this, but what it does have in place of extras are audio commentaries from a lot of film historians and stuff, like Tim Lucas, David J. Scow, Michael Hyatt, Reba Wisner, Steve Mitchell, people like that. And the transfers on this release are beautiful. They're excellent black and white transfers of all the original episodes.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I love it when a classic TV show gets really good treatment, especially on Blu-ray, because the majority of shows shot before the 80s were shot on film anyway, so of course they're going to lend themselves to a beautiful transfer as long as they're handled correctly.
Mm-hmm. My only real issue with this set, though, is it's a disc housing. When I received this as a screener, so I can't say I want to complain about it. I'm looking out for consumers and stuff. I just want them to make aware of this. It's a very cheap disc housing. It's flimsy, thin cardboard case, and you open it up and the discs are inside. And when I received a lot of the discs, the disc housings were completely broken.
The studios do a really bad job sometimes with putting together some of these sets, and not in the sense of the what's contained within the discs, but how the discs are contained within the set.
Yeah.
And I have so many that I would just love to complain about. And I think we're planning on doing an episode at some point where we're going to talk about some of the worst ways that these companies have decided to start to release some of these films, whether it's, like you said, in a situation where it's a very flimsy case, where you got to slide it in something, whether it's a cardboard. I hate that,
Yeah.
Or they've got discs stacked on top of each other, and it's just, they're getting really, really lazy with it seems like. And it's like sometimes they're more worried about the presentation than they are the discs being contained. When 9 times out of 10, I'm a happier camper when I've got something like Shout's, Anchor Bay, and whoever else they worked with for that Halloween set.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of set I like, where it's all in their own separate cases and nicely housed, and I don't have to pull out 10 other discs to get to the disc I want.
Right. Yeah. Well, in the case of the Outer Limits, I would have preferred just single thin cases, like for at least two discs in each case, something like that. Not this thing that they put out here.
I don't even mind those thin cases, but at least as long as they're held in there, because I hate it when they've got them stacked on top of each other and other things like that, or you got to slide them in an envelope or.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna cut it short here, and we'll have more on the next episode when we get into some more titles, especially some more Shout titles. So hopefully you can join us for that real soon. Until then, I want to thank Tim for joining me here on Talking Blu on Midnight's Edge.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here.
If you like this video, then please click the subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified for all the latest uploaded content. Due to recent changes to YouTube's monetization policies, we'd also like to ask you to please consider supporting Midnight's Edge and its sister channel, Midnight's Edge After Dark, through Patreon. As thanks for their support, patrons will receive early notifications of mini-documentaries, special behind-the-scenes making of the Edge videos, bloopers, outtakes, lost episodes, and more. You can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Be sure to check back for news and analysis on the corporate politics behind your favorite genre movies, as well as updates and discussion here at Midnight's Edge.